University of Alaska Disability Services Annual Conference. All access, all the time. Sharing space together. When we come together online, we often don't feel connected to our land and can mistakenly imagine ourselves as disconnected from physical space. In reality, we join these virtual sessions from offices and homes built on the traditional, unceded lands of Indigenous tribes and peoples across North America. Disability Services would like to express gratitude for access to this beautiful, majestic land and for its caretakers. We also acknowledge that our shared virtual space exists because of physical infrastructure. Zoom servers connect us based on resources and availability. When you join us virtually, you're borrowing resources from other communities that make this sharing possible. If you don't know the Indigenous history of the land you occupy and would like to learn more, please visit native.land.ca. The University of Alaska acknowledges the Alaska Native Nations upon whose ancestral lands our campuses reside. University of Alaska Anchorage.
Dena'ina, Atnadine, Alutiiq, Sugpiaq, Chugachmute, and Eyak peoples.
University of Alaska Fairbanks.
Dina people of the lower Tanana River.
University of Alaska Southeast.
Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian peoples.
Welcome to the session.
So today we're going to talk about fundamental alteration. This has been a question for some time about what constitutes an accommodation and when it fundamentally alters a program or a course. So we'll just get started. So if you didn't join us this morning, I'm going to go briefly over what a reasonable accommodation is. A student has registered with DSS, has a verified disability, and that disability interferes with their ability to access or demonstrate learning. The accommodations remove barriers, and some students have preferred accommodations, but just know that they have a right to an accommodation. It doesn't necessarily mean it's their preferred one. And some examples of accommodations that DSS approves: extended time for testing, a quiet testing room, sometimes a calculator, and alternative media, braille, large print, or turning their books into audiobooks. So what is a fundamental alteration? Under the ADA, it is a change that is so significant that it alters the essential nature of the goods, services, facilities, privileges, advantages, or accommodations offered. So for example, a fundamental alteration alters the approved course outline and the objectives of that course or a program. So an academic adjustment does not mean a fundamental alteration. And I'm going to go through all this, and then we're going to have some interactive discussion about some different examples of fundamental alterations. So if you're kind of a nerd like me, you can look up case law. I just put two up here. Sweeney versus the Texas State University. They found that institutions are not required to alter the eligibility criteria necessary for a program. And in Campbell Lamar versus Institute of Technology, accommodations should not give a student with a disability an unfair advantage over classmates. So especially that one, it was a student who wanted to have their exams given to them in a different format, which would have given them an unfair advantage. So that was considered fundamental alteration of that course. So Disability Services participates in an interactive process with students. Students request the accommodation, they meet with us, they talk about how their disability impacts their ability to learn. We talk about accommodations and how they can help level that playing field for them. We talk to instructors about what their learning outcomes are in their courses, or we talk to the directors of programs to ask what essential requirements students have to meet to be in their program and to graduate from their program. We might review course syllabi and content guides, discuss alternatives with faculty, and how a student might show mastery of a skill so that they can meet those course objectives and meet the requirements of the program. If there's ever a reason to believe after all of these things have happened, the DSS staff has met with the student, we've talked to the faculty, we've reviewed course documents, and we believe that there is a fundamental alteration. Under OCR rules, we have to form a committee to make sure that an objective decision is reached. And interestingly, when UAA and UAF and UAS were talking, I don't think any of us have ever had to form a committee. We just know that if there ever was a disagreement, that's what would happen. So who's on the committee and what do they do? The committee is comprised of objective people who are knowledgeable about that content area, any licensing requirements for that particular area, any accreditation for that specific school, the student's disability and accommodations. It is not only people from the one department for which is under discussion. So if it's a nursing course that we're seeking this committee to review, it can't be just people from the School of Nursing. The committee then identifies the objectives of the course, considering the instructor's information, the program, any department or requirements, including the course curriculum documentation. And most importantly, they make sure that the requirement is not just based on what's always been done. That's very important to remember. So this is a protocol that was developed by Jamie Axelrod at Northern Arizona University. And this is the process that the committee would follow. So they make sure that the item, the skill, or the objective is clearly documented in the course content guide. They make sure that instructors consistently and uniformly require that objective. Again, this goes back to making sure that it's expected of every student in the program. It's not just something that's always been done. And whether or not the accommodation that's being requested invalidates that objective. If the answer to 1, 2, 3 is yes, then they move on to, are there alternative ways to demonstrate the mastery or skill required? And have we creatively searched for an alternative? Again, going back to the makeup of the committee, do we have all the necessary information and people involved in this decision? And have we researched to see if other colleges have found alternatives to achieve the objectives without fundamentally altering the requirements? So if the committee has explored it without discrimination and believes the accommodation would fundamentally alter the elements of a course or program, and there's no alternative, then the request can be denied. So here's our first scenario. A student enrolls in the Fire and Emergency Services Program. Paraplegic student seeks an accommodation because they are physically unable to climb a ladder. Is this a fundamental alteration? What do you think? Depends on the course. Very good. As I always say, and most people laugh. So if the course requires that the student be able to climb a ladder, then it is a fundamental alteration. All right. Scenario 2. A student taking a small engine repair has limited use of their hands, asked to take a written test instead of actually repairing an engine. Is this a fundamental alteration? One yes, one it depends. So yes, it always depends. And if the course objective is to actually repair an engine, then it is a fundamental alteration. That's correct. This is a very popular request. A student with dyscalculia is registered in an arithmetic course at the college. The purpose of the course is for students to learn algorithms to manually add, subtract, multiply, and divide without a calculator. This objective is clearly stated. The student requests an accommodation to use a calculator. Is it a fundamental alteration? Lots of yeses. That's correct, because the course content guide clearly states they must do it without a calculator. I like Catherine's. The department may want to reconsider the objectives. And kind of the point behind all of this is to really, as faculty and as department heads, to really think about how you're writing your syllabus, how you're writing your course content guides, what you're trying to measure, and is there a way to measure it that can be more a universal design so that all students can access those objectives. So a student with a learning disability registered in statistics, the instructor only permits or scientific calculators and prohibits graphing calculators. The instructor explains to DS that they expect all statistics students to manually compute essential statistics using formulas and simple calculators, and consequently, the graphing calculator would represent a fundamental alteration of the course. That's correct. Well, comments about what are the objectives, no instructor, not course specific. So it doesn't say that it's written that way in the course content guide. It's just what the instructor is saying. So again, it would be what's the course objective.
There was also a comment, Anne, from Jeffrey, that sometimes when the listed purpose of the course is out of step with what's really essential, that can be can create problems for putting appropriate accommodations into place too, and that's part of that conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks, Amber. So a student with both visual and physical limitations is enrolled in microbiology. The course content guides includes the objectives. Students will effectively utilize a compound microscope to focus upon and identify microbes. The instructor explains that the student must look through the scope and manually adjust the dials and settings to view the microbes. The instructor looks through each student's scope to assess the skills. Because the student is incapable of these actions, the instructor requests the student be dropped from the course. So would accommodations for the student be a fundamental alteration? Okay, I really like Faith's answer. And Cheryl, assistive device for the use of a microscope. Yeah, there are cameras that you can hook to a microscope, and UAA actually owns a couple of them that will project what's on the microscope onto the screen. So therefore, it's not a fundamental alteration because there is an alternative. All right, scenario 5, a student wants to take all their tests at home. Although tests are usually administered at the college, or if they can't take them at home, they want to take them only as open book, and other students are not given that choice. Is this a fundamental alteration? Got one yes. Yes, it is. You're correct, Catherine. It is an unfair advantage. Absolutely. And this is almost the exact scenario in the Sweeney case law. All right, scenario 6. A student with social anxiety requests to be excused from giving presentations in a public speaking course. Is this a fundamental alteration? And we added on here a student, when your thought process, a student wants to be excused from writing assignments. And does it matter if it's a biology course or a composition course? And Cheryl's saying yes, it's fundamental alteration. Good, good. Could they record themselves? And that would be part of the discussion with the faculty. And again, making sure that what's written in the syllabus, what's written in the course content guide is very explicit about what is expected. Yes, maybe, yes. Number 7, a deaf student is enrolled in a clinical nursing course. And the instructor states that the student's unable to take vital signs, which is an essential function of clinical rotation. Is this a fundamental alteration? Cheryl, see, we get these people from the nursing department and they know the answers. That's right, there are visual stethoscopes and visual blood pressure machines. So not as much discussion as I thought, but lots of time for questions. There is lots of assistive technology available for lots of different things. So interestingly, though, when we're talking about, I want to go back to the nursing example. We've had students ask for like extra time, and there are requirements that they be able to perform certain things like take blood pressure within a certain time limit. And we can't alter those because that is a requirement of our accreditation or the certification as nurses. Jenny, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I was just going to add that, you know, kind of what makes our job so interesting is, and I think I'll see what the other campuses think, but part of the reason we usually don't have to go to the committee protocol for fundamental alteration is before we get there, kind of like in Anne's scenario examples with the assistive tech, is we think of ways to accommodate that an alteration, you know, and so it's really interesting that way. I love your examples, Anne.
Faith asked, when it comes to assistive tech, who pays? Well, it's not the student. It tends to be DS that pays for the assistive technology. I know the 2 microscope cameras that we have, that DSS paid for those, and they live over in the biology department. Other questions? Second language courses with 4 skills objectives. What do you mean, Catherine? Reading, writing, speaking, listening. So interestingly, we actually had a deaf student years ago who wanted to take Japanese. And the course objective said that the student had to be able to speak Japanese. And they were physically unable to speak Japanese. And they actually did alter the course objectives for that student because what they wanted was to be able to read and write it. And so the student was allowed to continue in the course and be tested on their ability to read and write Japanese. Does that answer your question, Catherine? I know we say we won't alter the learning objectives, but that was a lot of back and forth discussion with the faculty on whether or not that would satisfy the goal of the student and the goal of the instructor. And they decided it would. So Catherine asks, is there a process for altering objectives in a situation like that, or is there an ad hoc? So it's all individualized. It really is that interactive process that DS goes through with the faculty and with the student, because it's going to be disability dependent, it's going to be course dependent. So it is usually a long discussion with all the parties involved.
And can we talk a little bit more about those first couple scenarios where there kind of depends and what those depends are? I'm thinking of the firefighting one where maybe I could see a situation where it wouldn't be a fundamental alteration depending on the course objectives. How about you?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Again, it's whether or not the program requires the students to be able to climb a ladder. So it really is how it's written. And I know that I've discussed with faculty over the years about making sure that their program objectives are written clearly. One example would be taking a blood pressure. If the objective is that the student can accurately take a blood pressure, that's great. They just have to do it one time. If you want them to accurately take a blood pressure over several instances, that needs to be written that it is several instances of taking blood pressure.
In the one scenario, Anne, where the exam was hands-on, right? Is that the right scenario for the auto mechanic one? Mm-hmm. Definitely see it not being, you know, if a written test would be appropriate, if it wasn't the objective that they actually physically are able to take apart a carburetor or whatever it is. And we do come across stuff like that, you know, especially in some of our more professional programs.
Yeah, absolutely. And Karen Haddock made a comment about the transition for students from K-12 to higher education. It's often something that happens in K-12 would be considered a fundamental alteration in college. And students really struggle with that. And then Faith asks, if an introductory course did not require climbing a ladder, and later on the program said they would have to, what do you do in a case like this? So again, can they meet the requirements of the program? But we can't tell them they can't take all those introductory courses. And I always go back to a student who's blind and wants to take ground school for being a pilot to fly an airplane. They can take all the classes they want, but they can't sit for the exam as long as they are aware of that. Do we have a greater conversation about the degree program with them? I don't, because I'm not an advisor. So I don't know if UAS and UAF do. I would often suggest that students talk to their advisors.
You know, I mean, our hope is that programs are set in, for lack of better words, to weed out students who don't have the proper qualifications. And it does put DS and students in a tricky situation, because we have had students get pretty far in a program that we're pretty sure they weren't going to be able to complete, or maybe they could complete the program, but they might not be successful in the field for employment. And so that's why a carefully put together program is so important. So for that one example, if in that introductory course, the ladder was required to physically do it, that would save a lot of people a lot of time and trouble. Yeah, and Karen Haddock, who is also a UAA disability services person and has a ton of experience, says the same thing. I encourage the student to talk with their academic advisor and faculty advisor. We don't know the programs, and we can get in a lot of trouble if we try to act like academic advisors. And we're too busy. We don't have time.
I often get questions from faculty and staff about why I would send them something as an accommodation, because we might send a letter as an accommodation because we don't know what the course objectives are. We don't know what the course content guide is. We depend on faculty to reach back out to us and say, this isn't going to work and here's why.
Yeah, I think it's really important to remind faculty that we're here for them too, that they can question accommodations. We're not going to get mad. Like Ann said, we have no idea. We're sending out letters. It's so busy. We miss a lot of stuff where you're looking at it and like, why in the world would they send this accommodation for this class? So always reach out to us. We love talking to faculty and love learning more about your classes and your course objectives. It really helps do our job better.
Other comments, questions? Quiet group today. Did not expect so much quiet. I'm not used to giving presentations from DSS that don't elicit a lot of questions. So we must be doing a good job since there's not very many questions. This will be available as a recording. So you can go back and share it or listen to it. Anything else?
And there is one more question from Catherine. It's a good one.
What are the most common types of accommodations that faculty think are fundamental alteration, but usually aren't? Interesting question.
I think that there is faculty who sometimes confuse the unfair advantage. I'm really glad that we had one of the cases that was an unfair advantage because, you know, I have newer faculty who are like, well, double test time, that's an unfair advantage for the rest of the kids or students, excuse me. And it isn't. It's giving the student access. They have a processing disorder, and it takes them twice as long to read every essay question and longer to write as well. I would say testing accommodations is probably the most common, and it's probably because it's one of our most common accommodations as well.
Yeah, agreed. I think calculator tends to come up a lot, and faculty don't want to let students do the calculator. So again, depends on the course and the student. We've also have students with processing disorders that want to use note cards on exams, and it really depends on the course and what's being tested.
And sometimes we also get requests for accommodations for speech classes and whether or not those are fundamental alterations. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So we have had I'm not going to talk about speech classes. If you want to, you can, Amber, but I'm going to talk about presentations in general. If a student has to give a presentation and they have a disability that would make it very difficult for them or impossible for them to give a presentation, we have come up with options for recording themselves and giving that to faculty. presenting directly to faculty. If the idea is not necessarily presentation skills, but do they know the material, then they can do it directly to a faculty member. Actually granted an accommodation for a teaching class where the course requirement was to demonstrate that you could teach something to the rest of the class, but it really didn't need to be to the rest of the class. The student could record themselves teaching and show that they had that skill of teaching. And Amber, have you given accommodations for public speaking and speech classes?
For speech classes, that's where it becomes, how is it written is one of the objectives of the course as to whether or not it's a fundamental alteration. But if the requirement is that the students present to, a large group or to public, physically in front of a group of people, then it's we have to figure out, is that really what you're trying to assess in the course, or is it that you want to make sure that they could get up and present their material in a thoughtful fashion? And so it's just a matter of what actually the objectives are. And then coming back to, what are those options of presenting to a smaller group, or is it an option to record themselves? But really it's a conversation at that point with the instructor as to what it is they're trying to assess. And then we look at accommodations from there. We do have another question about COVID accommodations. So Leo is asking if there are additional accommodations due to COVID, and if yes, what are those accommodations?
I'm going to jump right on this opportunity to share this information. So COVID, if a student tests positive for COVID or has to quarantine because they're a close contact for COVID, we ask faculty to use whatever they have in their syllabus related to short-term illnesses as their guide. So if a student had the flu, what would a faculty member do? And that tends to be written in their syllabus. So that's how we want them to treat COVID on the short term. Long term, because there is long COVID and students can be impacted by COVID for months at a time, we do treat that as a temporary disability. It tends to be the flexibility to make up their work from when they were sick. It could also be extra time on exams because of the brain fog that continues to plague people that have experienced COVID. Am I missing anything, Jenny?
No, I think that sounds good. I just add one more thing about the public speaking one. Recently, I was working with a student. It was really neat. It wasn't a public speaking class. It was a biology class, but presentations were part of the class. And so we reached out to the faculty, and this student really had pretty severe social anxiety. And we asked if we could do an alternate presentation, and what the student wanted to do was to record it. And the teacher said, sure, absolutely. And then she was like, I wonder if other people want to do that. And so then she gave not everyone in the option of recording it or doing a live presentation. And I just think that's so great.
Now, the one thing that has happened in the last 18 months is that people are discovering everything can be done differently. And that has been a big lesson, because prior to COVID, there was a lot more, no, I can't do that. No, that's a fundamental alteration than there is now. There's a lot more, yes, we can find a different way.
And we found a different way very quickly. That's what blew my mind, is how quickly we adjusted. Because, in DS, we hear no a lot. And so we have COVID on our tool belt to say, well, we transferred an entire university system to online classes in a week.
Yeah, to add to the COVID accommodations, we do have people who need to access courses remotely because of the ongoing COVID numbers. And they get medical documentation that says that they cannot be in a public space, even with people all masked. So we have done that as well to give that opportunity to people to remotely access face-to-face classes.
And there is one more comment from Jeffrey in the chat. He says, as I oft repeat to my students and student teachers, we should all be learners in the classroom. I thought that was just an important addition.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Jeffrey.
Any more questions, comments? Just to put in a plug for Thursday morning, we have a digital accessibility presentation. And then we also have at 10:45 Universal Design by Kayla Parks, who is at Portland Community College, and she was the director here in Anchorage for many years. So she's going to come back and share some wisdom with us on Thursday. I hope that you can all join us for that.
Okay, well, it seems like we're kind of wrapping up. I want to just thank you all for joining us today. We hope you can join for more sessions. As Anne said, we will be having another one on Thursday. And you will receive a survey following this session. We encourage you to complete it as well as provide us feedback. We really appreciate your attendance today and look forward to seeing you again on Thursday or maybe some of the other sessions that are available.